Hi. Thanks so much for being here on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much to Stephanie and Emma for helping us to co-organize this panel. And they're from the Art Basel team, and it means an immense, it means a lot to myself, AFIELD, and to the speakers, because to be given a space to talk about something that for us means so much and is so important, but it's actually so invisible, I want to say, for most people, is just a real honor. And the fact that we can bring this incredible group of people together in a physical way is also just helps us to reaffirm the practice that we do, even though sometimes it can be very lonely. Okay. So just a bit of context, because I'm going to actually let them do a lot of the heavy lifting. So I'm Chantal. I am the convener of AFIELD, and that's a funny title because AFIELD is a network, is an international network of cultural changemakers. And that's why this panel is titled Artists as Changemakers, How Community Work Can Become a Generative Practice. Sorry, my eyes are really bad. And so part of the work that we do at AFIELD is to acknowledge this rare practice where artists actually, in addition to their practice as choreographers, as visual artists, photographers, architects, either as an extension of their practice or in addition to their practice, they actually initiate organizations and projects that respond to real world needs within their contexts and provide or experiment with solutions. We're all here because we fundamentally believe that artists make a difference in this world. As visionaries, as thinkers, as philosophers, as poets. But in addition to that, many of them play an active role in contributing to their community. So that's kind of what this conversation is focusing on. I'm just going to take a look because I'm probably forgetting something before I hand it off. Yes. And I do want to acknowledge that, especially in these difficult times, sometimes being in Hong Kong and in the middle of a fair, we can forget that we are amidst a really difficult time in the world, with occupations and with wars, with threats, with an extremely unpredictable tomorrow. A lot of the systems that we are familiar with have failed us and are broken. And so we are also sitting here with people who are trying to think of alternative ways to see, to think about, and to consider what are alternative pathways and visions for the future. So I want to ground that there are really urgent, there are urgencies, and this is the gift of the artist in helping us in both poetic, in sensitivity, but also in direct ways to respond to those needs. In closing, I wanted to quote from somebody who's sitting in this room, and he doesn't know I'm going to quote from him, Harrow, who is part of the network. And sometimes we sit in a group and we consider what is the value of an artist contributing to world and systemic change. So I hope Harrow doesn't mind that I'm quoting him. He says, "Our systems are not functioning. Nowhere in the world do I see a path towards better systems. Artists already are the ones who experiment, challenge. They think about issues that we may not see and propose different ways of looking. By enabling a network of artists, the hope is that ideas for system change will emerge." And with that, I'm going to say I'm really excited to share the stage with you. The first collective to speak are HasLab, Cherry, and Tozer, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chantal. Let me introduce myself. I'm Cherry Chan, co-founder of HasLab, an art collective, and this is my co-founder and the original instigator of all the trouble we're making, Tozer Pak, conceptual artist from Hong Kong. So what does HasLab do? So we call ourselves a socially engaged art collective. We believe in advocating art and artist thinking as a new way of understanding and valuing society. especially people who are seen as socially marginalized. So we work with educators, we work with social workers, we work with other community organizations to build programs that present an alternative perspective on abilities and on success. So our programs change forms according to the communities we work with. Here in the images, you will see our work in a pilot program called, it's a very long name, the Neurodivergent and Obstacle Guided Visual Data Bank. From now on, I'll just call it the Visual Data Bank. We went to visit M+ with our friends who are disabled and neurodivergent, and served by a very caring local NGO called SAHK. So to us, this is just a simple museum visit, but to them, this is actually something very groundbreaking for them. A museum visit and the short workshop that followed, we achieved a few purposes with them. First, these individuals get to experience art like we do at Art Basel freely, which is not part of their daily lives. They are usually in their respective workshops doing menial work because of their various disabilities and conditions. So the visit itself gives them visibility and empowerment. During the visit, we also intentionally left the visit unguided so that they were free to see and experience art as they like. So through this experience, through their preferences, they got to express themselves as individuals, not just by the conditions and the disabilities. So we also found that self-validation powerful and strength-giving. After the visit, we sat down with them and did an art exercise where they drew from memory, no pictures, their favorite works from the visit. We then paired up their work with the original from the M+ visit, which is part of what you see here. Together, they become part of our visual data bank, which we hope to accumulate and add to the understanding of the unique visual language of this community and to catalyze further research and action in the art ecology and in true inclusivity. So through this exercise and some other exercises since our formation, we are less than 2 years old, we have organically developed a methodology of observe, inspire, and create and transform. It starts with an observation of a situation that is conventionally labeled as wrong or weak, like the communities we work with. As an artist collective, we find inspiration, be it in the aesthetics, in the attitude, or change of perspective in these situations. From the inspiration, we create art and transform the situation into something that can be appreciated by a wider community. So as another example, our methodology of observe, inspire, and transform was also at work in projects we have done with some schools. Recently, we did a 3-month-long action experiment we called Boredom is a Door to the Heart. It's really a play on the Chinese character for boring, which is Moon. Moon is a door with a heart inside, so we want to open up this door and get to the heart of what boredom really is. We collaborated with 4 schools from different backgrounds and abilities, 2 of which are special needs schools. We observed how students reacted to boredom in class with their so-called distracted behavior, which is more prevalent in students with ADHD and ASD. Rather than seeing their behavior as disruptive or even destructive, we see inspiration in their alternative ways of self-regulation, which is really what the so-called distracted behavior is. We transformed these insights into creative learning experiences, which are actually currently on display at our little art festival in Quarry Bay. I just checked Google Map, it's 9 minutes away from here, so please go see us. I invite you all to come experience what we call boredism. This is the word we coined for our exhibition. It's the creative way that we see boredom. So really the thinking behind our work is we want to reach out to communities that are often labeled as disadvantaged and provide them with opportunities to explore their artistic abilities and to amplify the inspiration we get from this interaction to a wider community. Using our artist thinking and perspective, we discover strength in disadvantage and in weakness. And we believe this gentle strength can have the power to change strong and dominant forces in society. So in Cantonese, we call this, it's almost like Tai Chi, Yi Yue Zai Keng.
Thank you so much. Marta, I'd love to, you have so basically we're going to do 7 minutes of presentation and then we're going to have open conversation. Also trying to speak about how this centers into your practice and how it extends from practice into community transformation. Thank you.
Hello. Are you going to click for me? Thank you. I'm really nervous, so bear with me. I have my laptop here. I'm Marta Atienza, and thank you so much for inviting me here and give me a chance to share. It's quite, it's crazy to be here and all of a sudden share something that we've been doing on Bantayan Island that all of a sudden people are interested, So let's go to that. Oh, so yeah. I'm working with an organization that we started, which is Goodland, and a collaboration with my younger brother, Jake, Dako Gamay. And so this is a team effort. I think I want to start with Bantayan Island. Is in the center of the Philippines. It's between the Visayan Sea and the Taeyoon Strait, which is the largest protected body of water in the Philippines. And since I started working there in 2010, the issues that we have identified, which I just want to share to give a better understanding of our context, is really ownership of the sea and land, social dislocation because of uneven income, as a lot of people from the island leave our island to work in cities, but also abroad. Just like there's many Filipinos here in Hong Kong. A lot of our leaders use the law for their own profit and interests. And the impact of course, the environmental damage and climate change, and tourism mistakenly seen as a solution. And I really want to share, maybe you can go to my tree now. No, sorry, this is the next. This next image, is an example of how fisher folks and that's coastal communities, are being moved inland into housing projects. And this really started with the super typhoon in 2013 because of these natural disasters hitting us. But there's also a parallel between our land being privatized and moving it from public protected areas into private lands where, with the push of tourism now have become prime real estate. And fisher folks that I mainly work with are being moved inland. And also the consequences of moving them off coastal areas is really direct destroying their way of life and of living. Next, please. So, moving to Bantayan, as an artist, my family lives there. My father's from there. My mom's from Holland, but she also lives on the island. I really started asking myself, how can I make myself useful? And seeing everything around me. And the question really always has been, how can art tackle social, environmental, and economic issues, which are all very deeply connected. And so I really wanted to talk today and share this. Throughout the years, we've come up with different diagrams and drawings, but I think this drawing is a good example of really looking at the art process as a methodology. Thank you, Sherry. So I'm just going to look at it also on my screen here. I don't know if you can see it. It's a beautiful palm tree. That was my older brother's idea of the final diagram for this year. But, really looking at the work since 2010 as my own work of documenting and using the video camera mainly, but it's also a tool that I've been sharing even before 2010, and really teaching really mostly young people, but also fishermen, how to use the camera as a tool to really tell their own story. And that's really like, we have now started to look at all of this material as an archive. And how do we then use this archive that we are forming together and telling our own stories and documenting? How then do we make it into useful outputs? And so there comes the art process also comes in, and that's really the methodology, which is really a way of thinking. It's a way of, you know, it's working with people to not only identify their issues, but it's to dream together. And when you dream together, then we can kind of create goals together or action plans together. So I put different outputs as the branches. And so, you know, the cultural output is really like, with our archive, we're creating evidence that our culture is very much alive and complex. And that then connects to, you know, the legal aspect of it, of keeping people on their lands, but also creating marine protected areas, which also connects to environmental output of creating protected areas where communities themselves can be the protectors. And then my art output, which has led me here to have these conversations, but it also has been sustaining all this work. And I call them dreams in action, because that's really when people's dreams are really about staying on their land and living off their land and being healthy and happy and being together with their families. So I have a few samples of how this looks on the ground. Cherry, please, next one. So this was the Gilubong ang akong pusod sa dagat. My navel is buried in the sea. That was the project I started in 2010, where I actually followed on my own brother getting on board international cargo ships. So I followed men from Bantayan Island that I also grew up with, working on international cargo ships. And when I came back home, I also documented the local fishermen, because realizing, also because my father is a sea captain, growing up with men being out at sea and far away, there was a need to have conversations at home. I realized that, and it wasn't planned that way, but it was, I wanted to share this because I learned so much from this project, and I feel like this project never stopped. This is the base of what we're doing. And it was started with just filming together, or me filming mostly in the beginning, and then sharing it at home. And then it became more organized, where people could see themselves on screen and start very difficult conversations about growing up without a parent, but also the dangers of working at sea, but also what's happening with why do we not have enough fish to eat anymore? And really kind of, and it took 2 years. Maybe you could move to the next one, Sherry. I became more organized, and I was holding a microphone. We needed a microphone because there were just so many of us. And we had to separate the dialogues separately with fisher folks and separately with international seafarers, also because their issues were a little bit different, but also because fisher folks could not be in the same room as international seafarers, because they felt like they were less than them, because they're not educated, they have not the high income that international seafarers have. So the final days of when we showed the 3-screen video installation came together with very organized dialogues, where we were able to bring these two communities together to talk about the dislocation in our community, and so really building community. So, the methodology is also really about building community, because I think we talk a lot about community, but I think a problem is that we're losing our community. Maybe next one, Sherry? And, now I jump into the present, where we have a lot of young people, especially documenting their own stories and using the documentation and writing and everything that they're collecting and mapping their areas not just making them proud of who they are, but also letting them and their communities, and they're the ones talking to the elders about being proud, not just proud of who they are, but where they want to go, and how they should get, and how they're getting organized. I'll show some images of that. But, you know, Jake, my brother, had a really good point, and when we are working on this archive, it's really, you know, the remembering as an act of resistance. And when people are moved off their lands, or, you know, just having, how do you say, even just going through this process is already an act of resistance. Maybe the next one, Sherry? And this is an example of Chona's dream. She's from the watershed, and she's now in the community college studying in information technology, and how she has this plan of how she wants to use her diploma and her knowledge in working together with her own community and forming these plans with her own community. Next one, please.
Should we just look at this final example?
Ah, yeah, sorry. See, I'm going on too much. Wait, I think maybe I can look at where... okay, maybe we can just jump. This is Fisher Folks Day. We had an ordinance for it, that we got all Fisher folks together to talk with the government. Next one. This is how, like, the archive looks on the ground, where dreaming and actual things happen, where farmers, this community now wants to create a co-op. They have their savings club. We can move to the next. This is how their savings club look, and to the next. This is the nursery that they are in collaboration with local government and the Technological University of Cebu. Yeah, I can end there. Sorry, it was fast.
Thank you. No, we're going to return back to in the conversation. Taeyoon. Taeyoon, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me and meeting these wonderful colleagues. So I'm just going to play a video and just talk about some of the inspirations. And I guess my practice is a twofold. One, which is the investigation about technology, and then the second is about community building. So I guess I can start with the story that in the year 2000, I was a very young art student. The first summer job that I had was working for installation team of Namjoon Paik's retrospective. So I got to see all of his work getting connected, dusted off, and bring to life. And already at that point, a lot of his works were not working. All the TVs were broken, but they were also not dead. So it kind of existed in this like extended life support. And I got curious about how technology, television, telecommunications work from that experiences. Another thing that I took away from that experience was that he was a very ultra optimist about what technology could be, and very idealistic and a little bit naive. That's not uncommon for the people of that generation, the post-war generation, who were really embracing the new capitalist mode of production. But it's been like 50 years since his best works were created, and I think the way that we see technology is very different from how they saw it at that time. There are still so many wars going on. There's enhanced forms of surveillance, exploitation, displacement, fueled by technology. So as much as I'm like fascinated by the poetics of code and aesthetic things that we could do with electronics, like making a computer with low-level electronics and kind of like writing code to generate interesting things, I think we need to look at technology with critical lens, and we need to ask technology to be different. I'm no longer just interested in like what is possible with tech, but I'm interested in like how can we use tech against itself to dismantle some of the power structure that it embraces, and also to create different models of being and living. So some of the recent works has been trying to connect the environment with the computational spaces, physically, metaphorically, visually, and to see the computational medium not necessarily as something alien to us, but something that is very human and something that is very material. Because if you look at computers really closely, it's actually just like rocks that are tricked into thinking. it's a rare earth mineral that's crystals that are vibrating at a certain frequency. And after like Samsung and LG and Apple gives us these devices for 2 years, we throw them away. It gets shipped to global south. It does not even rot in the earth. So it's this cycle of dead and undead that we are participating. So as somebody who's like working with tech, who's really interested in like what is the material nature of technology, there's a lot of ethical and artistic questions that I have. So I think that led to me to thinking about community, environment, and kind of the larger legal, political, social systems through the lens of technology. So code is, software that we create, but it's also legal codes. It's also financial codes. It's many other kinds of human relationship that are kind of decided. So a couple of people decided that is the code that we are going to run. So we could actually change a lot of the code. So the ways that has become more of a social practice is that through teaching, mostly. So I'm one of the co-founders of the School for Poetic Computation in New York City. And I'm no longer with the organization. I'm teaching at a more traditional universities now. But in the 7 years that I was part of it, we invited philosophers, hackers, securities experts, and artists to the same room and to think about what are the ways in which that we could change technology, specifically code. And also what is computable and what is uncomputable. And how can we use human bodies to compute, as opposed to being computed by the large surveillance system. So some of the images that we are seeing is that we are trying to understand how protocols work by dance. So we invited a choreographer, Corey Kresge, to lead a group of students and the community members to encode and decode with each other using very simple body languages. So this is very different from your typical computer science classes. We jump straight into algorithms and AI with Python these days, and I personally think that's actually a very missed opportunity. I think code is very visceral, and we can't abstract it away from the lived experiences of people encoding it and making it. So trying to send messages like packets of information using paintings, strings, flags, smells, all very visceral things has helped me and my community to think about technology different ways and to feel like we actually have a say in deciding the future of this. Because it's not just the Silicon Valley dudes deciding what the future of technology should be. It's actually the people who are using it, and we should have an agency in demystifying technology and to make it for something that we believe in. So teaching has been good, but it's also, the pedagogical mode has some limitations as well. Some of the other works that I've been doing are either curatorial or community collaboration, like inviting people from different marginalized communities, such as disabled communities, to do a dance together. Like in this image, we are trying to explain how internet works by using strings. And the group were actually a really incredible mix of the blind folks, deaf folks, and other community members. So we had to figure out very multi-sensory ways to communicate these ideas. And this kind of inclusive approach was inspired by my dear friend Christine Sun Kim, who's a sound artist born profoundly deaf. And she is just an incredible person to start with, but it's also she's an amazing communicator. She does not use spoken language, but she will communicate with anyone in this room without any problem. So that kind of the affect of communication and that embodiment of languages beyond just the verbal code has been fascinating. Here, we're making a room-size Turing machine using strings and some duct tapes. So I return to this initial question of optimism and technology and utopia, because the artworks of the 70s and even a lot of the media artwork that we see in places like these fairs or museums are very techno-optimist. And they serve the purpose of the tech capitalist organizations that sponsor them. So essentially they're cheerleaders for the corporates. I find that to be really offensive and also a missed opportunity for a lot of the arts of the generation. Is that we have all these power, but we're kind of kind of singing the song. So I'm not alone in this. There's tons of other critical media artists questioning these. There's a lot of democratic technology initiatives, activists in the Global South and North doing this work. And I think it's actually a perfect time to reimagine our relationship with technology. And that comes from the community first. So I'm really inspired by those opportunities. I'm inspired by what we can do together with our bodies, our materials. I'm really actually invested in like trying to figure out where the e-waste goes, because all these actually, like, it goes someplace, and we don't see that. And I'm really interested in like how to challenge the colonial structures in which the technology works. So trying to find the colonial approach of working with and against technology. And this is not a naive, like, open source will change the world type of thing. Like, I think open source and even free software is like inherently problematic. But I'm really interested in challenging capitalism and technology and colonialism as something tangible that we can reshape together.
Thank you, Taeyoon. Yeah. I have many friends who are in tech, some of them sitting in this room, and I always wonder what happens if they enter into conversations with one another. So I look forward to the conversations post-panel. What's been really interesting, so we've been hanging out a lot in the last few days, and what we realized is that amongst this group of people, and I imagine a lot of others working in this space with this kind of practice, is that we seldom forget that they are actually also practicing artists with that come out of studio practice, that make works for exhibitions, like Chuen. I know that you have, I mean, you need very little introduction in Hong Kong, but as a conceptual artist, really, the way that you observe the world and that you still have these articles in the Ming Pao, or Marta, you make videos, you know, and you really come out of like art school, and Taeyoon, you know, I also have seen your exhibition at Chat. So all of these are stellar artists who have worked with, you know, Hufang, I know you work with Tozer, and you're with Silverlens, and so on. And you speak very little about that practice, actually. How do you, is it almost like, I don't want to say like a division with a certain past, how do you reconcile that? How is it a continuation? So it's kind of a complicated two-part question, like where does that art reside, or is it almost just a tool now because you have this knowledge that can be applied, like you called it a methodology, you know? And then second question is, how does this, if you could succinctly put into few words, how does your knowledge as an artist really contribute to this practice? We use the word observation, like there's a particular way that artists observe, and I know that, you know, you really have such a sensitive way of seeing the world, the observation, so you train people to observe. You, it's tooling, you know, and you, it's critical thinking, like seeing, not drinking some Kool-Aid, you know? What would be some words that you would use to define what you carry over, and then what is the tension, and what do you have to let go over? What is a conflict? Okay, it's a lot, but. I don't know if everybody has headphones, but yeah.
Wait, 我轉一轉台喎。
I need to change the channel to Cantonese. Is that okay? Thank you, Chantal, for the invitation. Thank you for giving us this venue to talk about our work in recent years. When it comes to an artist creating something, should I wait for the audience to pick up their headsets?
Loop, right? Okay. These are our images. These are from AFIELD. These are basically they're on loop with images from the organizations and AFIELD as well.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think Chantal wants us to talk about the artist's practice, the creation process. Why are you moving suddenly into the community? What is the actual process? What happened? What is the turning point to trigger that? I can give you some examples. My work is not well segregated. In around 2003, that is 21 years ago, in this local paper, Mingpao, I have this column. Basically, I was thinking, how do I use newspaper as a kind of creation? It is a new media for me. I need to link it with creation. That is the norm. You have to do so. So when I was writing for the paper, I got used to using different medium to support my creation, and at the same time link what I did with what was happening in the society. I can give you one example. I have this journey in the valley. When I visited Tokyo, I created that work. I have many similar works because when I created in Hong Kong very often, I would place them on the newspaper, and that has to be something very relevant to the people. All my works are related to my daily observations. I visited Tokyo. I was just walking around. I bought this map called Tokyo 23 Areas. It was this big but very thick. It contained the entire city of Tokyo. So I opened the map. It's very thick. You can see maps on both sides. So there is this gap in between. You can't read what is trapped in that gap. I laughed. If I so happen to live there, I'll have to open the map and tell people, here, inside the gap is exactly where I live. So that was a joke. So I thought if I jump inside this gap and make a trip out of the gaps, what will happen? I started from the northern tip. I started walking up along the gap. I walked for 10 days and covered the whole length of the gaps. So that is the end of the project. But I realized a new way of traveling. It also taught me to read the map from a different perspective, use it the wrong way. So the map maker gave me this wrong way to travel. If it is done in the right way, nothing should be trapped in a gap. Well, I can't say this is horrible. This is actually very beautiful, but it carries a mistake. Something has been eaten by the gap. But I have been inspired. Can I use the map in such a way to travel? My 2D map became three-dimensional, containing my imagination. This is a sculpture. I turn a map into a sculpture. Originally it is flat, but a sculpture carries mountains and valleys. It was in our imagination a very mundane world, but it is a special imaginary world. So artists build up this ambiguity in such imagination. It is neither here or there. Everyone can be sucked into it, creating new imaginations. Based on that, it started rolling forward like a huge snowball. After my trip, I told myself, from now on, anything printed in 2006, anything published in that year, anything that was trapped in a gap, that will belong to me. So I collected many, many books, including this 2010 publication from the Guangzhou exhibition by Wong. It was called Made in China. And then in the catalog, there was this cross page, and the letter E was eaten by the gap, so it turned into mad in China. So I used that as well. So it kept rolling forward. So in different countries, different cities, I've been invited to exhibit my works there. Last year I went to Taipei. Again, Journey in the Valley. We used a Taipei map to do the same trick. I told them, let's try this out. Let's see where this gap will lead us. it so happened there was a primary school, national primary school, trapped in the gap. And I went to the school. I explained the concept to the students, how some things can be sucked into the gap. Together with the director of the library and Chinese teacher, we created this program, creative reading and creative writing. They would spend 2 lessons to read all the books in the library. Just look at what's been trapped inside the gaps. It was really funny. Sometimes there's a picture of someone playing the piano, but 2 fingers are missing, or some people having a meal, but 1 dish has been eaten by the gap. So it was really interesting. The students understood that going to the library is not just about reading the text, but from the diagrams, from the pictures, there is a new way to read. Then they, based on the sucked away things inside the gaps, to create stories. Everyone was outstanding. That was our methodology. When artists create, you can see so many things in the world as long as you believe it. And you can jump from one point to another. You can jump from a mistake. For example, on the map, you cannot see certain portions. Use your imagination. Be self-inspiring. It's just like boredom. It is negative, right? But it can also trigger you to imagine. So be inspired and create. And we can jump from creation to the next step. What is that? When we create, we are sharing something. Perhaps I created something in my workshop. My friends come to visit and they share that piece with me. But there could be real power behind it. It can be turned into a system. Everyone can use it. So after inspiration, it is creation again. How do you turn it into something systematic to be shared with others? That is what we are doing today. So there is nothing negative, nothing bad in the world, because you can turn bad into good.
Taeyoon or Martha? Do you want the question again? Do you remember? No.
Well, I mean, I think I shared. I think I kind of answered, but yeah, it's really, to simplify, it's really a way of working and a way of thinking. And when you work together, that's what you can bring to the table, you know? Like, I just, these last 2 months, I reinstalled 2 old works from 2016 and 19. It's very technical that I call island technology.
Do you want to describe the work?
Oh, okay, yeah. So
I've heard very little about your work. I'm trying to get into it.
In Saudi, they asked me to reinstall a work called Equation of State, where I have mangroves moving up and down, being pulled up and down, mimicking the tides, combined with videos of Bantayan. And they actually were able to source mangroves from the Red Sea, and I'm moving them up and down there in Saudi. But by reinstalling it, I remember when we were doing it on Bantayan, it was actually kind of a test for me of saying, can you help me move a mangrove up and down? And if they got really excited and wanted to do something with me about this, to make this happen, they were the people that I started working with in the organization for Goodland, because they were open to it. And we made that mangrove dance with a karaoke machine. But that continued to all the other work that we did, which was, you know, trying to find a battery solution and everything else. So, you know, it's really that, no? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question was like how and why we as artists do this work.
I mean, I'm trying to use another way of asking you to also talk about your work, because again, I think that we kind of tend, again, I'm saying we, but there's a tendency to not also talk about you know, the more conventional sense, but you are exhibiting artists as well, you know, and people, you were just a Sharjah, right? Yeah, Sharjah. No. Riyadh. You just came back from a biennial where you installed in Riyadh, and you were at the Mill 6 at Chat last year, right? So I think it's very easy to go directly to talking about why we're doing this work, what are the issues in the world that we're trying to respond to, but also I think both because this is the setting of an art fair and you see physical artworks outside, that connection feels important to me. But how does it evolve, and how do you negotiate? Because there's sometimes it pulls you in one direction when you also do very graphic. I mean, you know, you have not animation, like drawings, and yeah. So that's
right.
Is that clear?
I mean, I've definitely shown in museums and biennales, but I've never sold my work at art fairs. And I think that's something real that we can talk about, is that like, we have all these prestigious platforms, but also it doesn't correlate to sales. So for some people it does, but not for me yet. And I am pursuing that, but I'm also ready for a version of my life where I don't make significant sale until the end. And I want to be okay with that. And this is why the education, the activism, and organizing and curating has been a way that I can sustain my life and continue to support my practice. So I think to answer your question about art, yeah, I mean, sculptures, paintings, videos, and other things I take really seriously as a visual medium. I'm also okay when my social practice and education are independent from my visual artwork. I also teach at Department of Sociology to a group of very young, you know, sociologists and, you know, somebody who wants to become a lawyer. Like I talk to them about like what technology policy and creativity could do. I'm okay with wearing multiple hats. I'm actually becoming much more okay with separating these roles, because once I try to connect all of those things, sometimes they were in conflict of each other. And sometimes it becomes kind of a burden on each end. So I think I'm also okay with people misinterpreting my work to be something else, or only knowing an aspect of my work. So especially in a collaboration setting, because I think we all collaborate with a very diverse group of people. And the role of artists is really useful when you're trying to bring people together. And I think that lets you do things that NGO or activism sometimes have a harder time to do, especially in oppressive regimes. And also especially trying to bring together people who may have a different view about urgent topics, but for them to coexist and collaborate, like art has a power there. And to use museums and biennales as a public space to do these interventions. So that artist credentials definitely help with that. Yeah.
But I know that you also struggle because sometimes, especially Marta, where you're working, I know you've had to form an organization because sometimes the fact that you're an artist is not taken seriously. So what are some of the other drawbacks of limitations of this practice? And I don't know if there's other forms of training, because if you study in art school, you may not have the training of legal work, or what other forms of support and structural support, you know, resources would really help you to go further, or is the idea not to go further, you know?
Thank you, Sherry. I mean, I'm in the middle of really, I mean, this is good timing in a way to have to talk about this, because it's quite, it's all connected, you know, and how to, I think I'm at a point where where do I start in this? To also separate maybe myself, because right now the organization also needs me financially, because I'm using my sales and my everything, or if I get a commission, to do works that the organization is working on. And you know, if anything happens to me, the organization should be able to continue. And communities as well. Our communities are self-organizing, so they also have their own official bodies. But that's for them to enable them to, partner with institutions or the local government unit. But I'm also in the middle. It's, it's like where. Wait, I wanted to refresh. Can you refresh me, Chantal? Like,
Yeah, sure.
I have many points.
I think the main question was, there are also challenges. So I think before we're talking about what being an artist brings to this practice, what kind of methodology you can bring,
Yeah.
but there are also struggles and limitations because you're an artist.
Yeah, I mean, definitely to be, when creating voice. So, for example, for me, creating voice for Fisher folks is to get invited at the table, like what Ilan talked about in the talk. And that's why the organization is also really important, because it's that official body that enables us to represent or to get these voices to decision makers, So it's kind of, I mean, it's great to also be, I mean, I'm hoping that in the future we could also just sit there as we are, and we are first and foremost, we are artists, Yeah, I think that's what I would. You want to say something?
Sure. In terms of challenge, a lot of it is really funding and how and what kind of funding we can access as an art collective, because I think the art world sees us as more social, but the rest of the world sees us as very art. So there's actually a lot of public and NGO funding in Hong Kong, but it's very purpose specific, and we have to come up with a very specific outcome. So we've talked to multiple funders about what we do, and they'll be like, could you narrow the scope? Could you do A, B, C, D for X number of individuals in a very narrow group? And that's not how we work. We really want to raise more questions. We don't provide a very definite answer, but we want to raise awareness. We want more people to think about the issue. And this is not what, questions are not funded, solutions are funded. I think that's, as artists, that's probably a challenge we all face.
Yeah, they can't measure the impact, and that's really the problem that we have.
Yesterday when we were having a conversation, I really liked, Taeyoon, you asked us what we would want this audience to leave with after our conversation. I actually want to turn that around, and I want to ask, I want to ask what you want your communities, I don't know if you want to more specifically define what your communities are, but if there's one thing that you want your communities to leave with, what would that be?
It really depends on how you define a community, but my communities are a mix of academics, technology people, and art world. And also the local communities in Seoul and the United States, where I split time. And I am affiliated with and sort of like, I strive in more activist, more progressive communities, but the university that I work at is not that. The museums that I work with are not that. Tech companies are not that. But there are always like good people in those organizations that I consider allies. But we often have to work within the system that is part of the problem that we are trying to solve. And that has been a really big challenge practically and also conceptually to reconcile our aspirations for liberation and more democratic world and the existing infrastructures that we have. So the takeaway for the community would be that trying to locate the forms of oppression in local settings, such as marginalized communities, ethnic minorities, disabled people, economic minorities, and connecting their struggle with the global struggle that's happening like 18 hours from here, and that are with people who look incredibly different from us. So to find a map, to map the relationship between these different struggles, and to feel like that we have some agency in changing local change that eventually leads to societal change. So perhaps that is still optimistic. Maybe that is naive, but it's also, that's the only way to make sense of this incredibly complex web of oppression that we are part of.
In this local environment in Hong Kong, we understand things have been very difficult in recent years. Basically, in terms of constitutional system, there's nothing much we can do. But don't be let down when it comes to imagination involving people. There are so many possibilities. What we are doing right now is focusing on the least advantaged groups. If you see hope among them, everyone should carry that hope. That is my faith. We recently initiated a new project. It's called Observing the Bad Things. We observe people acting out or doing bad behavior. For example, people ignoring the red lights, the red traffic lights, jaywalking. Try to give yourself a good explanation. Perhaps they are the most agile people. They know all the shortcuts. That's why they are jaywalking. If we have better city planning, we can ask them to help. How about people who litter? What can be found from these people that is good? Perhaps they have no burden. If you ask them to help you to let go of all the rubbish in your home, they are the best candidates. So in every city, there are good things, there are bad things. Don't be bothered and troubled by the bad things. You should have faith that all bad things through art can be turned into good imagination and good actions, and then influence others to do the same. Then we can change the world.
I think everyone had said.
And then I have one last question, and then I will see if there's any questions on the floor. We can overrun this by about 10 minutes, so I'm just stealing that time. And where does the word, the notion of beauty exist within your practice?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that, and that was actually really interesting because, I mean, beauty is a really important part of art, but it's also something very inherent to human nature, to seek beauty, to find patterns of beauty. I guess I will just close that from my end about one particular project that I did with a group of community in South Korea. So I started a very small gallery called Forever. It's like 500 square feet ground floor gallery that is home for like activist and socially engaged art. And the fact that it's a ground floor is a really big issue because many of the nonprofit or critical art spaces are either on fourth floor or in the basement. So it's wheelchair accessible. And we had an event last week of activists from disability rights group who have been fighting against the municipal power to make the subways and buses more wheelchair accessible. So it's a big kind of controversy locally. And a lot of people misinterpret them, and also they're target of a lot of the kind of misinformation, to say the least. But so that group did a project with dancers and poetry that happened there. But the installation that were happening in the gallery was for Free Palestine. So we created these clay discs, led by this artist Veronique, based in Boston, that invited the community members to make clay circles, balls, for each person who have been killed in Gaza, in Palestine at large. So the number is more than 40,000 now. So, and that project is really powerful because it's not like preaching the community about what's happening, but it's inviting them for conversations and co-creating. So when the wheelchair users came into the gallery, unfortunately, they broke some of the clay discs. So they're like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. How can I repair this?" But that led to a conversation where we made more discs and in kind of interweave an intersectional approach of like oppression that's happening so far away with local oppression. And I think for me, that's the beauty. It's like when things kind of combine and create this unlikely conversation between different communities.
I think I definitely echo what Taeyoon is talking about. And I think in social practice, that is the beauty of the people and the interaction. That's the sort of main aesthetic of what we do. We actually also have another sub-project that we're working on that we call the aesthetics of weakness. So it's really a lens, right? It's really how you see, how we perceive what's beautiful. If we have a different perspective on ability, if we have a different perspective of what is really considered, beauty in different eyes, we're just putting on a different set of eyes to see the work that we do with various communities. And we've done actually a ceramic project where disabled individuals who are not able to use all their fingers produce ceramic works that are very different from the fine works that we see as very intricate, technically advanced works. We see the energy and the creativity in very more primitive, almost primitive ways of expression, and we think that to us is another way of seeing beauty.
Maybe the work that I make with my friends, and I want them to first and foremost be proud of who they are. And so it's really important that they see how beautiful they are. So my videos, mainly the video works, really show that, and I want them, that's why also for Fisher folks, everybody came with their boats and they decorated the boats. And we achieved so much more through this celebration and pride, and that's how we got together with our leaders, So yeah, I think that's what I would like to add.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the floor. We have a few minutes. While we're taking questions, I'm just going to respond to Cherry when she said it's difficult to get funding because very few organizations will fund art and socially engaged NGO projects, and that's where AFIELD comes in. Just a bit of a plug. AFIELD is actually also a grant-giving body. In addition to bringing people together, social initiatives together, and having these conversations and supporting them in a number of different ways. We act as a solidarity network as well. We meet in person, online. We strengthen their work because it can be very difficult and very lonely, but we also raise money in order to give grants and support their continuation of their work and acknowledge this, again, very invisible practice. So over to the floor.
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. The title of this conversation is Artists as Changemakers, yeah? And we've been talking a lot about community work and stuff like that. And I wonder if we could name this kind of community, yeah, it's a different kind of ways. If we could name them Changemakers too, as the opposite side, if we're talking about the artistic sphere, yeah, maybe the change of the personal view. And if we're talking about just community workers, maybe the changing in infrastructure, yeah, system. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think the impact of our work is when we are no longer needed in the community and when it becomes much more grassroots approach. And there are like bookstores that are set up by artists and activists 10 years ago that continue. There are museums that like that. So I think the impact is not as glamorous, and sometimes it's very painful to let go of your baby that you invested so much of your personal life and network and time and money and your creative practice. But I think the success is when you're kind of walking away, and that exists without you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your practice. I'd like to try to ask a question that hopefully can kind of tie everyone's sharing all together. So I come from a place that's sort of starting to look at technology as a de facto institution and institution as a type of technology. And when I mean institution, I also don't mean that the kind of well-funded body, but also mostly organizational work. So in a way that I'm trying to ask, so Taeyoon's work, where you sort of offering basically an experiential kind of organization to help people to understand how technology can be alternatively experienced and understood. And however, the kind of micro-politics that might come out of it is that people might be able to experience what the alternative could look like, but not able to access to changing that technology, right? So eventually it becomes the changing becomes only an advocacy, only becomes an imagination where people cannot be actively part of the making processes. And where then I see a lot of work in the Martha's sharing is that the kind of like bodily experience where they do come, and people in the island do come together in organizing and making archive, and all that archive itself is also an institutional framework in itself. And of course, I would imagine that would be a little bit more accessible, but the difficulty there then is like the scaling impact becomes also a little bit uncanny, let's say. So I kind of also really appreciate with the HasLab, I hope I pronounced it right, as in like sort of like almost the artist becomes the interfacing layer between the funding body and let's say so-called ordinary people in like organizing this kind of shifting change. So I wonder whether in terms of like the role of community art, how does that kind of with Taeyoon's work on like how does community being able to actively be the agent of change in the technology itself, and then how the other two group of sharing as like the community as an agent of change of like even within themselves. So if that's possible to answer. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it really rings the bell with some of the pre-panel conversations that we were having about, first about like modules, like how can we scale out of our own human capacity and 10 people that we can work with, how can we transfer this practice as either pedagogy or as a kind of a rules or scripts that could be reenacted other places. So that's really fascinating because like we may be able to, that may be one way that our practice scales beyond our own time and body. Yeah, I've been experimenting with that of like basically like authenticating other person to perform my work in their own languages. That happened in Hong Kong a few times as well. I think it's the larger question is how do we see ourselves as like artists within and outside of the institutions, and if we are making our own institutions, how do we see other people entering in that spaces? So that's an active conversation that I think we need to have.
I think we may close off. I don't know, Stephanie, if yeah. Unless there's other pressing questions, I want to say thank you for staying behind on the on Saturday afternoon, for your attention on this. I think for me, just the most important. I'd like to want some of the most important conversations maybe in this space. And thank you to Tozer, Cherry, Marta, and Taeyoon for your time and for flying in. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Emma, for giving us this important slot, the last panel in the conversation series. We're very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chantal.
Thank you.